didn't fit the story they created, Manifest Destiny. It only works when Indians were savages and they...
The interesting thing about this piece, right, because they're talking about the Phoenician, but not Phoenicians, because the Phoenicians came after the Chaldeans, right? This right here, hold on, let me turn your fan out. This right here is talking about something they found here, but it's not just that. That Chaldean language and writing system is all over the Americas. But this is the kicker, as I revealed in my last video, that Christopher Columbus came, but not just him. There were a lot of Hebrew speaking priests that were sent to the Americas. Do you know what one of the things that they said in the book? I think the book is the Lost 10 Tribes in America, in the Americas. What they wrote. This is what they wrote. They said that the indigenous people were taught by Satan. Makes you wonder in that Revelations, right, when they say that the synagogue of Satan. Yeah. Yeah. I'm provoking thought today, baby. Yeah. It makes you wonder about that statement in there, right? But this is what they said, that Satan taught the indigenous people the Hebrew language, the Hebrew culture, and the Hebrew customs. Guess what Satan taught it to him? Guess. I bet you won't guess. You know what they said. Yeah, so they wouldn't be Christians. If you know anything about the Hebrew culture, which Christianity removes, and this is not to make Christians mad, this is why they don't teach it. This is why they don't teach the history. You know, you go to Bible study, you get a whole nother sermon. You don't really get a whole lesson, right, about the history of Christianity. You learn that in school and it's still twisted, right? It's a reason why you don't get the history. But this is the thing. Everything that was Hebrew was completely removed from it. So basically what you get is a hijack of the Hebrew culture, customs, and principles. And then they only take the words and then they throw out the culture, custom, and principles. And everything else is redone again. Yeah. So everything that's about the people in the beginning of the book, the Old Testament, doesn't match what's in the other book, the New Testament. See, this is why y'all always have this problem with the Bible. Is because you don't understand that concept. So when you merge two different thoughts together, of course it's not going to make sense. It won't. But that's the reason, and that's the purpose. So that you won't have true understanding as to why they don't line up. But you don't take this concept, which is go back to the original people to gain understanding. No, y'all throw that out. And what you do is you take the Christianity that you learned and you go with that. And you know what's really interesting about psychology that I really love? The thing that's very interesting about psychology is you learn how people or how the behavior of people works. Christianity was really or is really embedded in the people. There's a verse that talks about the Hebrew people and how the religion that their captors will enforce on them it said it'll be like a seared iron. Do you know what it's like when you burn fabric with an iron? Yeah, that imprint never leaves. This is why y'all can go out with your Gumbro doctrine and say you men and that are gods and all that other stuff, because you're taking the concept of Christianity, but you're not applying the Hebrew concept, which is the Old Testament, to understanding anything, because you still have Christianity still embedded in you. And again, this is not to be rude to people who are Christians. I just provoke thought for you to get to looking and studying the history. See, because that's when you'll begin to understand. There's a guy named Marcion of Sinope. Marcion of Sinope, he's the one who wrote the first draft of the New Testament. But you know what's very interesting about that? Huh? Do you know what the Christian theologists or scholars would say? That he didn't know what he was doing. He's bad. But he wrote the first draft. And you know what they'll say? Well, supposedly he wrote the first draft. Well, if it's the first written draft that they have, then that's all they got. But this thing about Marcion of Sinope, you know what he said? He said the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament, they're not even the same God. And he distinctively say the Hebrew God. He said he was a mean and vengeful God. And Jesus' God is not the same God that Moses had. Now, if anybody go research the history of Marcion and they found out he said that, do you know what most people are going to think? Ah, shit, y'all. Something's off here. But Tertullian, that guy, he came after Marcion and he set the groundwork for Christianity. He was a follower of Marcion. See, this is why I love psychology, right? Because then you begin to see why people write the things they write. Because then you'll understand why the importance of kind of murkying up that thing to say that Marcion was a rebellious guy and he was a what's that term Christian use? To say that they went off the path. What's that term? I can't think about it, but it'll hit me later. I'm sorry, I got ADHD, y'all. Thoughts be all over the town. But he followed him, and his thoughts went right with him. But then they'll tell you that some of the scholars decided to add some of the Hebrew concepts. They really didn't. So when you're looking in the Old Testament and you're saying that Jesus is found there, when you get to the Hebrew concepts, he's not in there. And I know that's hurtful for a lot of people. But I would suggest that you look up Deuteronomy 13. Because see, in Deuteronomy 13, it has something very distinctive there. And what it says is that if the Hebrew people, anybody that were of their people told them to follow a God that their forefathers never knew, that you were supposed to kill them. That you don't listen. And even if the things that he taught you that had a prophecy attached to you came to pass, and if it was different from what Moses taught you, know that God was testing you to see whether your heart was really towards him, Yahweh Eloheka, or not. So when you get the Christians coming to the Americas and the natives worshiping a God called Ahaya, which is Hebrew for the God that was on the top of the one that Moses met, right? Eye asher eye. I will be whom I will be. Life that brings forth life. Life everlasting. And those people said that they would never worship any other God. Yeah, they said they was gonna kill him. So it makes sense, right? That the Catholics that came here, because remember, Christianity mostly were Catholics at the time. Especially those that went across the sea over to him, would say that the devil taught the indigenous people the Hebrew language, customs, and principles. And he only taught them that so they wouldn't be Christians. You know what they did? They killed the parents and took their children. Just like the Bible said they would. Yeah, it said they would take your children and teach them other stuff. This is why people have a hard time understanding the Old Testament, because you really haven't lined it up with all of the things that the people experienced here. But I'll say this, Mr. Marcion and Manifest Destiny, that them Hebrew people was on this earth, right in this land. There's more to this story. But I don't know if you really want to know more. But if you do, drop it in the comments. I'll bring you up. Shalom and message.